really important is just how the significance of public education is highlighted during this time. You know, it's such an essential and integral part of our community, and we're seeing that definitely with the work that all of our staff members are doing as we address, you know, trying to provide distance learning supports during this closure, if you will. Um, you know, it presents obviously unprecedented challenges for all of our students and families, and it really has highlighted and exposed some of the gaping systemic inequities that we have. You know, we knew before this that we had housing issues, that we had inequities in income or employment, but certainly throughout this challenge, it's magnified those things even more significantly. But I'm very proud of the work that our educators, our administrators, and other staff members have been doing to come together and essentially transform how we're delivering classroom instruction, while also supporting those critical needs like the childcare, the food, social, emotional, and technology support. We essentially put together a distance learning program in a couple of weeks, and that would typically take months, if not a year, for anyone to put together. And what we see now through part of this effort is that we have a lot of our families that do not have access to technology. We estimate around a third of our families needed technology or a computer, and perhaps even half of those students lacked access to the internet. So those things have really been highlighted in our efforts right now, is trying to identify how we can get them the resources that they need to be able to support the distance learning. As of last Friday, we delivered more than 12,000 devices to our students and families. We still have about 3,000 to 4,000 students that are needing connections or devices still. So we're working right now on delivering hotspots. We made a significant purchase for hotspots, and we're rotating the distribution of devices with hotspots to those students and families. And we also have been supporting our classroom support staff. We distributed devices to our educated, our professionals, our paraprofessionals, to make sure that they had the resources available to assist with the distance learning for teachers. So it's been a challenging process, but we're still committed to making sure that we get the resources that our students need. And I would also be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about how we've done other things related to this kind of pandemic situation. We are distributing meals to our families and students in Minneapolis. We distribute 2 meals a day to any child under 19 years of age, and they do not have to be a Minneapolis public school student. So we distribute probably close to 18,000 meals a day. And again, what they can get is they get a box that has 2 meals in the box for 5 days. So they get a total of 10 meals. We're also assisting with childcare for our first responders. We have on average about 90 students every day that are getting support at different sites in Minneapolis public schools, so that their parents can provide that critical first response care for our communities. So, it's a situation like this that, again, has reinforced just how important the role is of public education in our schools in the community.
Wow, that is very impressive. I really didn't understand all that you were doing, and I'm sure many of the community does not. So thank you for that. Well, let's turn to the comprehensive district design, because that's been in the news quite a bit. And I want to ask you, just to begin with, how do you respond to the concern among community members that this is mainly boundary and enrollment redesign, reshuffling of the chairs, which districts seem to go through about every 8 to 10 years?
Yeah, it's not uncommon for boundary changes to occur in any district, and I think the piece that is usually focused on is just that. Anytime you have a discussion about change in the district, people are very much interested in what is that going to look like for their school experience. But the comprehensive district design is really a systematic long-range plan that we are using to guide our decisions about every aspect in the district, from academic programming to our placement and policies, to transportation, community schools and magnets. So it's a lot about our resource allocation. And the work of the comprehensive design has really been bearing on our ability to deliver our mission and vision of every student receiving a well-rounded education and graduating academically, socially, emotionally prepared for success in college and career. And this is a process that we've been engaged with for a number of years now. We've sought public feedback in the spring of 2019 on strategies to improve our student achievement throughout the district. We had students, families, and community members challenging us to look at how we have our structural and institutional practices and policies that are contributing to the gap or the achievement outcomes, the disparity in outcomes, and requested us to take action to address those problems. So it's really a roadmap for how our district can be more intentional about providing academic quality, equity, and sustainability. And the boundary and enrollment decisions are not just about reshuffling the chairs. They're one part of a systematic approach to integrating our schools better, both racially and economically, also stabilizing and balancing our enrollment, and then ensuring that we have adequate staffing and stable staffing as our enrollment steadies.
Okay, well, you mentioned achievement gaps, so why don't we start by you summarizing the achievement gaps that we see, not just in Minneapolis, but in the state of Minnesota, because it seems that we have some of the largest gaps in the country.
Yeah, when I first transitioned to Minneapolis public schools, there was obviously an opportunity to learn more about what was going on in the city, what was going on in the state, and what I found is that the disparities of academic outcomes in Minneapolis are not unlike what other large urban districts are facing across the nation. It's very consistent that these are challenges that happen across all of the large urban districts. And, contributing to that are a number of things, as I alluded to at the very beginning. When you look at the disparities around housing and around income and employment and, the wellness or the mental health of our communities and the impact that those things have on our ability to maintain or to create successful environments in our schools, we're challenged by that. But specific to Minneapolis, what we're seeing is that we have some of the highest achieving students in the state, and if not in the nation. And predominantly it's our white students and students from wealthier homes that have been outpacing our students of color and students from less privileged economic positions. And we see the effects in many ways, ranging from the test scores to graduation rates to just the general overall feel or enjoyment of being in the educational system. You may have seen this also recently. The Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis published a lengthy report with a lot of different data in it. And one of the significant pieces of data was obviously around the achievement and how that shows up in our standardized tests. And so what was highlighted there is that for when you look at the fourth grade reading evaluations, 65% of white students were proficient in those assessments. Contrastingly, well, you looked at the students of color, Black and Hispanic counterparts, they were at 31 and 32% respectively. So that again just reinforces that these are the gaps or the disparities that we have in Minneapolis public schools. And as part of that, our current district structure and formation allows that to persist and to grow.
So there's been a lot of history over the last 20 to 30 years of community reaction to the achievement gap. There have been lawsuits, specifically the NAACP lawsuit of the 90s, and then open enrollment. And it's created a lot of financial stress for the school district for the last couple of decades. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that, because I think sometimes people think, how did we end up with these
Mhm.
problems without understanding that they've been building for a while? So would you like to give a little context, historical
Yeah,
context for us, please?
yeah. Thank you, Catherine. I'll do my best with that. There's a lot of Minnesota, Minneapolis historians who probably know this much better than I do, but it has been something that's been persistent and present for a while. Back in the 90s, the executive director of the Urban League at that time, Gary Sudduth, had questioned the district around how state funding for low-income students, which is known as compensatory education dollars, were being used. And as that question was posed, the state legislature kind of changed the law to shift, instead of school districts receiving the money and being able to use it as they see fit, the money had to follow the students directly to the schools they were attending. So that was a shift back then. And then in 2000, the state of Minnesota and Minneapolis Public Schools District was part of a lawsuit settlement with the local NAACP. And in that lawsuit, the NAACP alleged that the state of Minnesota and MPS, as well as some other entities, failed to provide students of color in MPS with an adequate education as required in the Constitution. So what came out of that was uh, part of the settlement term was the creation of the Choice is Yours program. And the general approach of that was that if you were a low-income student in Minneapolis public schools, you could open enroll in any of the 8 suburban districts, and you would receive priority enrollment, which would ensure better access to attending that school district or that school. And then the state would pay for transportation um, to these other districts. So that was a huge settlement that impacted kind of the district's overall enrollment, and some of the disruption, I guess, or instability of the district's population there. And then what we started to see around that time also is an annual loss of up to 1,000 students, particularly in the north side of Minneapolis and the northeast side, which when that occurs, that reduces the revenue, I guess, of the state aid that districts receive. I should also note, Catherine, that it's pretty well known that we are constantly challenged with the underfunding that we're not get, or I guess the underfunding that's happening around special education and our English language learner services, both from the state level and the federal level. And so that is something that has, significantly impacted our district. And we've been, again, trying to kind of reconcile as we are, challenged with, millions of dollars of underfunding of special education services, not being available to the district. But it is still a priority of our school board and of our district to make sure that we're providing those necessary services for our special education students and our English language learner students. So with those things as a backdrop, and then you have, of course, the ongoing costs in fuel, transportation, utilities, as well as again the funding from the state that is struggling with keeping up with inflation, at least in the last couple of years. So all of this has impacted our financial situation, our budget, and we're consistently looking at 15 to 20 to 25 million dollar adjustment every year that as a result of all this.
Thanks for that context. My memory, just briefly before we move on to one other to the next question, I just wondered, what is the percentage right now that the district gets reimbursed for special ed? The district and the state, it used to be under 20% for special ed. So it was one of what we would call the unfunded mandate of the federal government. Is that still that low of a reimbursement rate for the district?
It's significant. We are underfunded, and I'll give you a range because it does fluctuate depending on the year and the percentage of students we have. But we're underfunded by about 56, anywhere from 56 to 58 million dollars for special education, and our English language learner program will fluctuate between 8 to 10 million dollars annually. So those are significant amounts. And again, if you go back to the budget shortfall that I mentioned, which is since I've been here has ranged from anywhere from 15 million all the way up to 30 million. Those dollars that are not present for special education or our English language learner students would clearly cover the shortfall that we are facing.
Okay.
Again, but that is a value statement that we're making around making sure that our students have those resources and those needs for special education and English language learners, and we'll stand behind that any day of the week.
Okay, thank you. Well, so as you've mentioned that we have been losing students, 800 to 1,000 students a year for years, has the district conducted exit interviews or surveys with families who've left the district during those years? And if you have, has there been any useful information that has been used by the district to try to win back those families or try to keep families who haven't left from leaving?
Yeah, we've heard from families in many different ways about why they're leaving. We have conducted exit surveys through our staff, and we've also engaged in a process recently called the parent participatory evaluation process. That's where we have parents who are connected, obviously, to the district and connected out into their respective community to reach out to families and find out why they are leaving. And what we found consistently is that there's some common themes. One of the areas of significance that we've already touched on a little bit has been the academics. That their children aren't getting their educational needs met in one way or another, and I think there's a lot of assumptions that families, don't prioritize academics, and that's certainly not the case. They have a high priority for academics, and we heard that through some of these exit surveys or from the recent parent participatory evaluation group's feedback. We also heard strongly from families that the culture and climate is important, and in many cases, they felt like their family was not supported or welcomed and valued at their school. And this gets to the core of things, and what we're wanting to do around education in Minneapolis public schools is really making those strong connections, regardless of what school it is, regardless of the classroom or the subject area. We need to make sure that our families feel connected and our students are welcomed and acknowledged for who they are. So that's something that was loud and clear from the feedback from families. And then, of course, always paramount for a parent, the safety and security of their child. And when that's not present, it's hard to move past anything else. So that feedback came around either through transportation because of the transportation routing or the access to school, via walking, as well as in the classroom, which contributes, a variety of reasons contributing to the classroom situation. But those are the common themes that we continue to hear from families who are leaving, the academics, the welcoming atmosphere, environment, and the safety and security. And in part of our comprehensive district design, we're addressing these elements.
So let's get into the comprehensive district design. So you start out talking, it's structures, policies, and practices. I think are the three big changes you're talking about. So let's talk about the major structural changes that are proposed to improve student outcomes. So let's start with locating magnet schools centrally.
Sure. Well, we have a number of magnet schools in Minneapolis public schools. And what you'll see if you were just to look at the map of where those schools, those magnet schools are located, they're kind of all over the place, if you will. They're not centralized. They're not consistently dispersed around the district. They, in many cases, tend to be on the very outskirts of the edge of the district. And so what we recognize is that placing the magnets in the center of the city makes them more accessible to students from across the district. It also cuts down considerably on the transit time for students and families. And so with the money, being saved in that transportation, we can invest that into the integrated learning environments and offering specialized programming for our magnet schools through the surveys that we had from parents and what they value, such as the arts or the science, technology, engineering, arts and mathematics or STEM programs. Montessori, language immersion, and global studies. So that's a big part of the structural change is around the magnet schools. And obviously, a school that was once a magnet school and having that theme transition to another school has been, a process of concern for some families. But the accessibility is really what we're trying to accomplish with our magnet schools, making them more integrated and then more accessible for our students and families across the city.
All right, let's talk about middle school. So 20 years ago, um, the League of Women Voters was very involved in middle school reform that the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation had funded for 5 districts, including the Minneapolis Public Schools. We did a big shadow study, sent hundreds of volunteers into all the middle schools in the city. Um, and that time there was a big move toward K-8s. Now we're moving back to 6-8s. What's the thinking?
Well, obviously, we still value our K-8 models. I think what we have done in this proposal that's moving forward is we've identified our K-8s as magnets. So it is an option for families to choose or to select that. It's not as they are right now. Many are structured to be this is your choice. You don't get
Mhm.
to consider anything else first. This is your neighborhood. So with all the 6-8s, now in a 6-8 structure, except for those K-8 magnets, we're going to be better able to ensure a well-rounded education, including access to technology, to the arts, to physical education, career and technical education. We're also looking to be able to expand our athletics and the offerings throughout the district. And I'm really proud of our that we'll be doubling our capacity at our middle and high schools for the mental health therapy for our students. We know that this is an important focus and priority for our families and for the district. And so really looking at the coordination of our middle schools in a holistic or well-rounded approach is what we're proposing with our middle school models.
Okay, well, that gets me to dual language bilingual education, which was a new concept to me. And my first question when I was reading all of this was about whether we have staffing to support that and what exactly that is. So if you could explain that for us, that would be helpful.
Sure. Dual language or bilingual education, there are a number of different ways to address bilingual education. The dual language program that we are proposing in the district is really a two-way model. And that means that we have, you know, uh, students who speak, a language other than English, and they're learning in that language. And then they're also learning the English language. And then we have English speaking students who are learning another language, in this case, Spanish. And then they are also transitioning and interacting with other students who are learning that language. So as we looked at our dual language bilingual education program, we have a number of seats allocated in the models, for students who are currently enrolled in our immersion programs. We have about 1,600 students enrolled in our K-5 immersion programs, and we're projecting of having seats around 1,700 available through these models. So, we do have enough seats available. Again, what we've done is we've identified these as magnet programs. So we've centralized them or used the existing programs that are there in a more central location. And again, we'll be supporting all of our learners and our staff with this transition if this comprehensive design goes forward and is it approved by the board.
So we've been talking about magnet programs and magnet schools, but the plan also talks about redrawing community school boundaries to have fewer racially isolated schools. And what does that look like?
So there's a big piece of the equity puzzle, that centers around strengthening our schools through integration and better reflecting the communities where our schools live. We also have this belief that balancing these factors in the schools are going to stabilize our enrollment and staffing, which again positively impacts the environment for both the students and our staff. As far as community schools are concerned, along with our emphasis of having that decreased racial and economically isolated school model, we're strengthening our community schools with an enhanced focus on K-2 literacy, the reinvesting of transportation savings into programming and instruction, and then building the connections to the surrounding community and resources, and equitable access to supports for students based on their needs. So this is again part of that whole notion that we're looking to give an opportunity for our community schools to have the connection and the reflection of those values, and by localizing who attends that area or using that neighborhood, we believe we're going to strengthen a lot of the opportunities for our communities and the students who live within those areas. And this again is a district-wide approach. It's something that when you look at certain schools, they will say we have that already. And what we're finding is that there's significant disparities across the city. And so our goal is to create conditions for success for all of our students throughout the city. And so wanting to make sure that we're prioritizing that and the approach of community schools and decreasing those racially and economically isolated schools is our intent.
Well, when we talk about high quality schools, always the big issue is who are the most effective teachers? Because as every parent knows, that can make or break your child's life and your family's life for
Yeah.
that year if you've got a great teacher. So, how, if you can discuss a little for us, how the comprehensive district design responds to the district's own internal report published in November 2018 on teacher diversity and hiring practices. And it would be helpful, I think, if you describe what efforts are already underway at the district, what additional strategies are being used to recruit additional teachers of color, because part of that, um, the question about teaching and the achievement gap that keeps coming up in the reading is that we have 66% of students of color in our districts, and I think teachers of color may be less than 20%,
Yeah.
fewer than 20%. So can you talk a little bit about that report and how you're responding to that through the comprehensive district design?
Sure. I consider myself a teacher at heart, so the importance and significance of that connection to the classroom with the teacher, as well as the connection to the school with the administrator and the support staff, those are all very, very real and are integral to any type of success we're going to have with whatever we're doing in the district. And so it really does start with ensuring that we have the highest quality and the best suited educator in our buildings for supporting our students. You mentioned, what we're doing or what we've been doing around the recruitment. We've made some important progress in expanding and diversifying our teacher pipelines, and we're going to continue to innovate and to grow. You also mentioned just the limited number of teachers of color in Minneapolis public schools. I think that's again very representative of what the state is made up of, as well as educators. So there's some limitations we have there because the way the process works in getting a teaching certificate, we don't have a lot of candidates that typically come through our system aligned to what our values are and to what our needs are, specifically if we're looking to have our teaching staff reflect our student population. So we've developed a couple things. One is a Grow Your Own initiative, which provides new and innovative pathways into the teaching profession, and also reduces some of those potential barriers for entry. For example, our special education teacher residency program is a partnership that we've had with the University of St. Thomas for a couple of years now, and it's to provide a one-year pathway to licensure for identified MPS staff so that they can get their license while they're working in our classrooms. And that's been a huge opportunity for those who are already working in the district and who have a strong connection and are committed to being a part of Minneapolis public schools, and they also have the skills to do more, or they have the desire to do more. So we've really been able to nurture and foster that program with the partnership from the University of St. Thomas. And we prioritize special education because there's always a significant need in the area of special education. And we wanted to make sure that that investment was a long-term investment. Another area that we've been innovative in is around the high school to teaching pathway, which is really designed to help students earn college credit toward their licensure. We've just recently started that program. We have it at one of our high schools. Patrick Henry High School is going to be really targeting and focusing on that, but excited to be able to see students who, again, have the aptitude or the desire or the interest to pursuing education, public education, and then giving them a sense of what that looks like. Education or being an educator is more sometimes than just what they've experienced. It could be a special education teacher, or it could be a physical education teacher, or it could be someone working in education in a human resources department. So really trying to just give them the broader picture of what education looks like, but obviously with the hope and the desire for that to be in the teaching field. Um, Another innovative thing that we've recently embarked on is becoming our own license provider, which would allow us to train new teachers tuition free. Well, the program participants work full time in Minneapolis in our classrooms. And this again, allows us to really craft and design what we feel those critical elements of teaching needs are in Minneapolis public schools. We're specifically focused on equity and social emotional learning, those strong connections. And how do you get someone who's new to the profession, aware of that and giving them an opportunity to practice that in the school district, you know, other than just hiring them. So this is a great opportunity for us to train specifically around the licensure area with our employees and our staff. We've also increased our teacher recruitment budget, and we've hired an additional recruitment coordinator, which again allows us to ensure that intensive community-based and out-of-state recruitment, looking specifically at our historical Black colleges and universities and our tribal colleges that are out there. And of course, you can't talk about recruitment without focusing on retention. And this is a critical function for us here. And to that end, we've invested in a new teacher mentoring program. We've established a staff ombudsman to act as a listener, a mediator, and to work to create, the grassroots affinity groups to support our teachers of color and to provide school-based kind of equity coaches and training. So there's a lot of work that's going on, and we recognize that our progress trajectory has been small, and so we're constantly evaluating and looking for ways to not only retain our employees, but also figure out innovative ways to work on the recruitment piece, because there are so many challenges around acquiring a license in Minnesota, and also just the educational profession is so complex, especially in a large district. But we have so many positive things to offer for staff and for our families, and we just want to do our best to make that happen.
Well, thank you for that. And you've spoken about Minneapolis maybe licensing its own teachers. And I wonder if you could explain very briefly and in plain English what kind of limitations the district might have in recruiting because of what many people think are rigid licensure laws in Minnesota, and how that impacts then the district's contract with teachers union with the seniority issues in bidding, how that impacts Minneapolis's ability to address some of these problems. And then we can go into, as you talk about that, discuss the ways that the comprehensive district design is trying to address those.
Yeah, so I would say, the system is set up to give us what we're getting. And we all acknowledge that we have to do better in changing and, addressing, again, the disparities that we have, especially around the achievement of our students. And what we have with the comprehensive design is really that intentional effort to create those conditions for success and to support our educators and our teachers. So that is something that is a integral to this work. So what are we doing in partnership with our union? We've committed to doing a few things differently. We're obviously, right now we're in contract negotiations with our teachers union right now, and we're making some significant gains. Specifically, one of the things that has recently come up is that we've been able to uh, shorten our process of what's called interview and select. And so that's reduced the amount of time for an interview process for internal candidates. And it means, rather than having to wait another 5 weeks, we can initiate um, hiring for our internal folks if that's a desire for them. Or we can then begin recruiting and looking at interviewing outside of the district. So, we hire quality teachers and are able to access, teachers of color earlier in the season. And in the past, what had happened is many of those teachers had already been hired outside of the district because of the late timeline that we have. And it's all related to, our budget and then determining what our projections are for staffing. And then when you have two rounds of interview and select, certainly we want to acknowledge and support our employees in the district and make sure that they are given an opportunity to take advantage of those vacancies and positions that are available. But doing 2 rounds really limited us from being able to go beyond the district and access new teachers and bringing them in. So that's been a huge adjustment that we've made around the interview and select process. Um, we also have recently signed an agreement with the teachers union, an MOA, to allow us to protect, I guess, or support staff who are in the Grow Your Own program. So, as I mentioned earlier, with our University of St. Thomas partnership, we've got educators who have been through our program, a residency program, and they're now employed in the district. And through the MOA, if there were a layoff or reduction with staffing, they would not necessarily be the first that would have to be removed. We work on a seniority basis kind of approach. And so this allows us an opportunity for those individuals who we've invested time and they've invested their time with the district to be retained, and they're not the first consideration during a layoff. So that's been a great addition. And then of course, we've also been looking at a retirement acknowledgement or incentive. And what that does is that allows teachers who have a significant number of years in the district to take advantage of an incentive for their service or acknowledgement of their service. And so if we know that someone is planning to end their career, as an educator, this is a way to acknowledge them, and it still gives us a chance to be proactive and kind of get ahead of the recruitment, if you will. If we know that someone's planning to retire and they identify this earlier on in the school year, then we don't have to wait to start that whole process. And so we can then, protect either the new teachers we hired, or we can then begin the recruitment process of other teachers outside of the district. We're also working to ensure that we have the right teachers in the schools, and we're investing in strategic staff supports for schools with the highest attrition. What we find is that a lot of our schools that are racially identifiable or have high poverty, that there's a lot of instability with enrollment. And so we have some instability with staffing. And so we're working on trying to ensure that this is adjusted. And so recently we had a tentative agreement with our teachers union on protecting, I guess, if you will, schools that are identified by the Minnesota Department of Education as racially isolated. And so what that means is that they will not have to be the first in that process of being laid off if there's a transition. And so that's been really a great acknowledgement by both of the groups, the district administration team and the union, to see that, we can look at doing things differently. And so we're very pleased to be able to have that tentative agreement moving forward.
Wonderful. Okay, so that sounds like progress. So
Yes.
we've talked a lot about K-8 changes. and I want to move to the high schools. I noted that in reading the comprehensive district design that it sounded like K-8 International Baccalaureate was no longer going to be in the district, but it sounds like International Baccalaureate programs, IB, will continue in the high schools. Is that correct?
Well, what we have right now is we have our funding for our advanced academics program is where you would find international baccalaureate programs. So it's part of our programming plan, and obviously as we move forward and we identify what those school structures will look like, that's part of the intent is to examine that. But we're not eliminating IB per se at our high schools. That's not the intent. What we're doing is we're analyzing the data. We'll be having conversations about, what do those offerings look like at schools. We've got a number of schools that have a wide range of, IB, college in the schools, advanced placement, and then we have other schools that don't have any of that. And so we're really wanting to analyze that and make sure we identify what is most essential and most critical for that school to create those conditions of success for all of their students. So, there is not an intent to eliminate it at the high school level. At the same time, we want to make sure that we are looking at how we are distributing access and resources to support our students.
Well, you're probably not surprised that the most controversial part of your plan are boundary changes.
Uh,
And I want to talk about one boundary change in particular, and that is for Southwest High School. And I noted I'm thinking it might have been in some of the responses on the district website or else on Nextdoor. I can't remember where I read it, but people who lived south of Southwest High School were being moved over to Washburn High School, and they were wondering why. But I also noted that families in Kenwood and Lowry Hill, which is on the northern end of the chain of lakes, and then of course Southwest High School is at the southern end of the chain, and those families have been drawn to Southwest High School because of the IB program for over 30 years. And I'm just wondering what the thinking was behind changing that boundary for Southwest in general and for Kenwood in particular.
yeah, I think you're on to the notion that anytime we have a conversation around boundaries, there's going to be a strong interest and a lot of history, a lot of consideration to how families identify with schools, and that's not something to be taken lightly. And so I don't want to minimize that by any means in this work that we're looking at with the boundary changes. I think taking a step back and just recognizing that as we look at the district overall, the changes that we're proposing are again in large part because we're trying to address a number of things. Whether it's our enrollment or the space that we have available for some students in schools or the lack of space in other schools, our transportation, trying to strengthen our community schools, and then looking at the magnet configuration. So wanting to make sure that if we centralize our magnets, that we still have enough space available. So those shifts are all going to be a part of what needs to happen for this comprehensive district design. The title itself alludes to it's going to be a significant change because of the comprehensiveness of it. Regarding the boundaries, the high school boundaries are based on our middle schools. We had a value of wanting to keep our middle schools together, the students in our middle schools together. And so based on how that looks, then you also have your middle schools feeding into high schools. And the Kenwood feed to Anwatin is based on Anwatin's proposed boundary, the middle school boundary. So it wasn't about moving a specific group from a school. It was about, again, the keeping and maintaining the middle school boundaries as keeping the middle schools students intact as much as possible, and really looking to balance for that balance of integration, again, economically and the socioeconomics of it, as well as the diversity of our schools. So it is something that we are very aware of and recognize that this is a challenge for some families. We are also utilizing a process with our enrollment and our our lottery process within the district that, is still accessible. But that's something we will be managing going forward as well, paying close attention to the configurations of our schools and trying to ensure that we again have the resources available to create conditions for success for all of our students in their schools.
Well, I want to end with a question that has been brought up by people in some of the school board meetings, and that is, how do you respond to concerns that the comprehensive district design vote should not be held while the pandemic stay-at-home order is in place?
Yeah, it's certainly an
And I
understandable.
think, oh, excuse me,
Okay.
and before you answer that, it might be helpful if you talk a little bit about the statistics on, and if you want me to, I pulled some on how much input you have sought from the community before coming up with the design, but that might be helpful as you talk about that.
Yeah, I can give you the high level. It's certainly understandable that people are, feeling stress and concern around COVID-19 and where we are with this global pandemic state of things. And I again want to acknowledge that and recognize that, and know that, we're seeing that in our distance learning system, where, there's a heightened anxiety and wondering about what's next, and how can we move forward with, even the notion of grading, as well as, what does it look like for graduations for kids in summer school and all of those things. And so I think we're all in that state of concern as it relates to COVID-19. And I will say, from the administration's position, one of the things that we've been doing for the last several years is developing this comprehensive district design. This started, gosh, I think it started in December of 2017. Where we began the conversation with the school board and had some, change in direction and some feedback from the community. And cumulatively over those several years, I think we've had over 10,000 kind of opportunities, or individuals provide feedback and commentary around, what direction we should be going or how we should be doing things. And so there's been a lot of feedback, a lot of different information being shared. There's also a great deal of opportunity moving forward. The board is in the position where they've asked me to address a resolution around this work. And part of my requirement, I guess, or part of my expectation, was that I delivered a plan for them to consider, the comprehensive district design. And so that has been presented to the board. It was presented just at our last business meeting, and it's, up for the board's consideration on May 12th. And obviously they have a lot to process, but it's ultimately they'll vote on it to approve it, to not approve it, or to make modifications to it. But we've been doing this work for a while, and I just want to be clear to everyone that this is not a vote and done. There's a lot of implementation work that has to come. There's a lot of work that's going to be, through partnership, through engagement and involvement from our staff, our teachers, our community, our administrators. So, while there's a lot of unknown pertaining to COVID, there are some also things that we know that have to change, and can't change without action. I will say that because it's comprehensive, it has elements of the budget in there. So the budget is something that the board still has to vote on. It's a requirement that we vote on that, in June, so we can have a budget going into next school year and our next fiscal year. There are capital plans tied to the comprehensive district design. If we don't move forward with the comprehensive district design, we still have to move forward with capital plans and decisions. So that work still has to be done. There's career technical education planning that we have to be providing to the state. So that's included in the comprehensive district design. And then, of course, the professional development. We have professional development that has to take place for our employees, for our teachers and staff, and that's tied to the comprehensive district design. And that's something that we'll have to move forward as well. So I think that throughout all of this, it really comes down to that transition timeline for people. I think as you've alluded to, and we've noted that the boundary changes are the significant concern that people are looking at in many cases. And what does that mean for them? Right now, our timeline is that if the recommendations are approved, then the substantive changes would take place in 2021. And so um, any kind of modification of what we're doing would push that implementation timeline back. And as I said, there's still a lot of work that has to be done, and a lot of engagement, and certainly, for us to be successful in the district, it's really going to take everyone working together. This is a design. It's not been completed yet, and we are going to need the support and involvement of our staff, our students, our families, and the community on the planning and of the implementation and the implementation itself. So that is a lot of what we are needing to address as soon as a vote and decision is made. You did also mention, Catherine, the numbers of things. I don't have those statistics in front of me, but like I alluded to, we've had a number of different iterations of conversations, feedback from surveys to, on-site kind of presentations and more feedback. There's a robust website that we've developed that provides all of the different information around the comprehensive district design, and certainly more information there if people are interested in learning about it.
Well, Ed Graff, Superintendent of the Minneapolis Public Schools, thank you so much for taking the time with us today to explain in detail how you're moving forward both with online learning and with the comprehensive district design. And thanks to you for tuning in to We the People, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis. This is Catherine Shreves saying thanks to you, and we hope you tune in again. Goodbye.